it's recorded. All right, thank you very much for attending. My name is Mark Sneider. I'm owner-president of RSW US. For those of you that don't know us, we're an outsourced lead generation business development firm. Works exclusively with marketing service companies across the country. Have close to 50 different agencies of sizes and types that we represent. During today's webinar, if you're interested in tweeting our hashtags, you can use hashtag RSWUS or hashtag agency new business. Either one of those would be great. So really appreciate your time today. Probably run about 30-40 minutes, and if you do have questions, feel free to chat the questions to me, and I'll either answer them as I get them, or I will go ahead and save them for the end. So why don't we go ahead and get started. Today's presentation is called Getting to Close. It's a webinar designed to help you improve your chances of closing new business. And what we hope you'll learn today are three things. One is what works and doesn't work when moving your way through the new business development process. The other thing we hope you'll walk away with today is what marketers look for in meetings and proposals, RFPs and pitches, and what you need, to deliver. Somebody asked, what are the hashtags again? It's RSWUS, or the other one is agency new business. So, and then the third thing we hope you walk away with today is, of course, how to improve your chances of winning new business. So we bring perspective, I think, from certainly two different sides of the world. One being the agency side, having managed a number of agency clients over the years that we've been in business since 2005. Understand the pains that agencies go through in trying to win new business, some of the challenges. We also have an agency search firm that we started in 2010, so we have a view into the mind and workings of the marketer, understand what they're looking for, some of the challenges that they face, some of the things that they find satisfying and not so satisfying in working with agencies. So bringing those two pieces of insight together, combined with the fact that we're surveying both marketers and agencies annually, multiple times throughout the year, and gathering some good perspective obviously helps us in providing, what are hopefully some helpful pieces of counsel to you today. In managing multiple agency relationships and helping operate as their outsourced business development group, obviously we're reaching out to marketers daily and trying to optimize the use of different tools, trying to help agencies effectively position themselves, trying to counsel them and coach them on their way to closing. So again, have been at that since 2005, and so I think we've built up a good base of knowledge that hopefully today's webinar will be of some value to you. So what we're going to talk specifically about today, we're going to start with a discussion around positioning. We'll talk about collateral. We'll talk about just general content development. We'll discuss websites and the things that are important in that you should be putting into websites. We'll also talk about managing meetings. We'll talk about post-meeting follow-up. We'll talk about proposal development. And then we'll also talk about RFIs, RFPs, and pitches. Okay, so let's start by putting ourselves in the mind of the marketer. What do or why do marketers look for new agencies? What makes them unhappy? And it really boils down to what Leo Burnett told his team during his valediction speech as he was leaving the agency and leaving it in the hands of the people that he had nurtured and were going to hand the keys over to. He basically said, when you stop thinking and just start doing, when you stop creating and just start executing, when you stop bringing ideas to the table and just start taking orders from your clients, and when the apples, which is what they had on their reception desk are just apples for eating and not who you are and what you represent, that's the time that the agency should take his name off the door. So, and that's when marketers start looking for a new firm. It's when all those things start breaking down. We see it every year in our surveys among key marketing decision makers. We ask a question thinking about the last time you reviewed new agencies to bring one on board. Why did you decide to review? And consistently since '05, it's lack of proactivity, not happy with strategy or thinking, not happy with creative, wanting more ideas to try and continue to build, my organization. So, if you kind of let the enthusiasm that you bring into a relationship wane over the years and you don't continually push yourself, that's why your marketing counterparts are looking for new agencies. They feel like they aren't carrying them forward, and we're seeing that to some degree on the agency search side. We don't have a ton of marketers coming to us looking for new agencies, but those that do, some of them are looking for new agencies in part because they don't feel like they're advancing them in the digital and social space. They want to stay ahead of the curve. They want to know that they're doing things effectively in this space, and they just don't feel like their agency is carrying them forward and bringing new ideas and new technologies to the table. So it's those kind of things that force marketers to take a step back and think about whether they feel they're really getting the most from their agency. So just keep that in mind and try and really push yourself as you move through that relationship. And so for every agency that I've seen with long-standing client relationships, I've seen just as many marketers who frankly get worn out with their agency. Managed a search recently for a home builder here in locally, regionally, and they had a long-standing relationship. It was 15, 20 years with the agency. And the agency basically became an order taker, and the client felt like they were constantly bringing ideas to them versus the agency coming to the table with new thinking. So, have seen just as many long-standing relationships as I've seen clients really kind of sour on the agency relationship. And frankly, it all starts the moment you start thinking about acquiring new clients. You need to first think about your positioning. Ask yourself, why would a marketer want you over another agency? And it's not because you're strategic and smart and efficient and fun to work with. Frankly, that's you and everybody else. I'll never forget one of the first clients we picked up back in '05. The client was really excited because they had laid out their elevator speech and shared it with me, and it was basically everything you see here on this slide. And that's anybody can say what's sitting on the slide, and you really have to try and push yourself to go beyond that. Think about your point of difference in terms of what and who and how. Okay, and we'll talk about the what's your competency? Are you good within a certain sector? Do you have a certain specialty? Just left an agency kickoff meeting recently where they have specific specialty areas that they concentrate in, like retail design is one of those areas. Have other agencies where they have specific sector competencies. So what is your competency? And who is your audience? Are you expert at reaching engineers? Are you expert at reaching women who make decisions in a household about a certain category of products? Is there a certain audience? Are you expert? We have an agency that focuses on youth and young adults. So is there something about the audience that you're particularly strong at and can bring some expertise and insight to the table? And then the how, is there a unique source of insights that you tap into? Are you super active in research and insight gathering that can bring some smart thinking to the table for that prospective client. Because frankly, at the end of the day, there are so many of you trying to knock on the doors of these prospective marketers. What marketers really want to know is, what new thinking can you bring to the table that's going to help me help me really kind of decide how are you going to advance my business differently than what I'm doing right now. So it might be insights, it might be a unique process, it's an approach to how you tackle a problem that the prospect might be facing. So that's the question that needs to be answered, and you can think about it in terms of the what is your competency, or who is your target, or how do you bring those insights and unique thinking to the table. It can be one of those or all of those, or some combination of those things. And then what to do. So how do you go about creating this positioning? Maybe map it out on a single page. It's something that we do when we start up with a new relationship. Compare it to your competitors and how they talk about themselves on their websites, or what you know about them. Maybe ask your clients how they view your competencies and expertise, and out of that you can gather up some intel. And then you got to live it. You got to live it through everything you do, in your collateral, in the content, in the website, and in presentations. Frankly, everything. Your team at your agency really needs to embody the positioning. It needs to show up. The language you're using needs to show up in virtually everything you do. So define kind of what makes you unique. Think about it in terms that are different than you may be thinking about it now, and then carry that positioning through all elements of how you communicate with your prospects. So let's talk a little bit about collateral, one of the areas that we just spoke to. Without collateral, it's tough to really sell your value. People have to be able to kind of not just hear from you, but they need to see what you can bring to the table. But your collateral needs to be an appetizer. It's not the main course, so it's not going to be the be-all, end-all that completely sells the value of what your agency can do. So some principles. You want to keep it simple. I think there are 5 basic things that you need to communicate in a piece of collateral, whether it's hard copy or electronic. And that's regardless of the medium. Again, whether it's a hard copy mailing, case studies, electronic outreach. So the 5 things. First is your brand. Who are you? Don't be shy. Let the prospect know what your agency name is, and if you've got a great logo, showcase that. What is your value proposition? Your how, your what, your who. Once you've defined that, let folks know what it is you do differently. Showcase the breadth of your client base to the extent that you can. It's we encourage our clients to showcase logos of clients that they are working with and have worked with in the recent past, to establish some immediate credibility in terms of the value of what you can bring to the table based on who you've worked with. Showcase your work. Have seen collateral where it almost seems as if the client or the agency is embarrassed of the work that they do because the images are so small. So showcase your work, and then certainly showcase your successes. If you've got measurable results to shout out, make sure that you're letting folks know about those successes that you've had with the clients that you work with. So some other principles that we try and espouse, regardless of whether it's, again, website or case studies or a piece of mailing or electronic collateral. The first is using half the words. Write it out and then force yourself to try and cut it down, because frankly, these marketers have no time. They're short attention span theater. They are pulled in a million different directions, and you need to be able to quickly and effectively communicate what it is you're trying to communicate to them in as few words as possible. And 2D is just as good as 3D. I remember when we first started the business, I had a client in Chicago that wanted to use literally 2x4 pieces of wood to mail, and we were mailing 2x4s to clients, and that program did no better than programs where we're using flat 2D mailers. So 3D is fine, and if you have 3D elements, maybe use them for warmer prospects, but all of our programs here use 2D flat, mailing devices to communicate, at least initially, the value proposition and the agency that we're bringing to the table. And build content around it. I mean, don't just live with the piece of collateral or the website. Again, try and build content around whatever you're using from a collateral standpoint, so that there's some consistency of the message and the value proposition that you're trying to communicate. So that content really needs that provides the support, really needs to do three things for you. It needs to support your agency's positioning. It needs to be a continuously flowing of sea of ideas, insights, and value for your prospects. And it needs to be activated. It can't sit passive. So as you write blogs about the things that are important to the space that you're focusing in on, if it's young adults and teens as an example, write content around your insights relative to that space. Have it that sort of insight kind of carry through everything that you do. If you're expert in the pharma space, write posts about things that are important to the prospects that you're reaching out to in that space. Tweet those posts, or if you find interesting third-party articles, tweet those. Show your prospects that you are there to present value, and you're there to be a thought leader in advancing their business, and because everybody else is just reaching out trying to knock on doors, and so the more you can use content to reinforce your value proposition and reinforce the positioning of being ahead of other agencies in terms of value that you can bring, the better. And relative to activating content, it's one thing to just write a blog post and let it sit. It's another thing to take that post and push it out to your prospects via tweets or via an electronic email campaign. So don't just let it sit passive and hope that people will find it. Obviously, posts can be of great value from an SEO standpoint, but try and do more with it and use it in ways beyond just the post itself. And this is basically, fundamental principle of inbound marketing. Build content, activate the content, and then act on those, taking action on the content. So you can build your own inbound program without the need necessarily of spending lots of money on software platforms. We do it here at RSW. We write lots of content. We're pushing it out via email campaigns, and certainly tracking those that click and open and reaching out to those folks. So it's something you can do yourself on a very simple scale. It's just a function of committing yourself to it, and it frankly doesn't require a lot of effort. A post a month and a release a month and a few phone calls a month to folks that click and open stuff, is at least a good place to start. It's not ideal, but it's at least a good place to start. So think about building content that supports positioning and is continuous and is effectively activated as you push it out to your prospects. And you don't need the inbound marketing package in order to make inbound work for you. Just need to be fastidious in your commitment to build and activate and act on that content, and do it with one voice. So that one voice includes your site, all right? Websites, marketers do not come to your sites to read about your philosophy or read about the activities going on around the office or see pictures of your office. All those, they're nice, but that's not why they come to your website. They come there to validate that you can do what they need you to do. It's all about Witham, as one of our new business directors here has continuously, reminds everybody. It's a what's in it for me. It's about the experience. What experience do you have in my category? It's about your successes. It's about the team, knowing that there's a solid team behind the effort to support the business. And some of these principles and some of these things here you're going to see consistently throughout, but just like Collateral, think about using half the words. You don't need to litter your site with lots and lots of text because people aren't going to take the time to read it. Be proud of your work and success, just like other elements of your program. Be proud of what you're putting out there and make it visible to the prospects that are coming to your site. And think UX, and that's user experience. But I'll talk about it a little bit later on. But user experience, really can kind of operate on a number of different levels. But as it relates to websites, you want to make it easy for prospects to be able to navigate to the places they want to go to. You want to make work linked to individual links and not have one link that takes you to a work page and then everything else kind of sits under the same link. So make it simple and logical for your prospects to navigate through your site, and just think about the things, if you were a prospect and going to an agency site, what kind of things would you want to learn about that agency to initially qualify them to determine whether or not they're a good fit for you. And it boils down to the experience, the work, the success, and the value proposition. So pretty simple. Let's move on to preparing for and managing the first call and the first meeting. I've talked a lot about over the years about checking the boxes, and when you walk into or start preparing for that first call or that first meeting, you want that prospect ideally to mentally check all of the boxes, and starts with your pre-meeting connects, and we'll talk about that. You want to keep thinking about the boxes, and we'll talk about what I mean by that in a second. Leading right into that intro meeting or call, and you want to keep it up following the meeting or call as you work your way to close. So, you want that prospect as you're kind of, seeding them with information about you, as you're mailing to them, as they're visiting your site, as you're having those initial conversations with you. You want them to say, without you telling them, yes, they have experience in my sector, and yes, they've dealt with issues that I'm dealing with. They've worked with companies like mine. They know how to listen and ask good questions. They're nice people that I'd like to work with. They seem to value my opinion, and they appear rather strategic. And so it's all about getting people to check these boxes without you coming in and selling them on all these things. And we'll talk about kind of how to do that here in just a second. So pre-call, pre-meeting, some basic stuff, but not something that everybody takes the time to do. Gather the facts, or what you believe to be the facts. We put together a client meeting form for each meeting that we set for our clients. We lay out, not just contact info and date, time of meeting, but any insights we've gleaned, any news we've picked up about that prospect or that company, and then some perspective that we might be able to offer to help guide that client into that conversation. So check the company website, Google News search the company, maybe find the prospect on LinkedIn. You might find some personal commonalities that you can use to engage with that prospect. And then we recommend, frankly, kind of putting the laptop away and formulate 3 or 4 questions that you can use to showcase your knowledge about the prospect and their business. And as an example, you might, formulate a question about a particular issue that they might be facing that one of your clients has faced. You might ask a question about the state of the industry, maybe, given all the changes in the healthcare industry, ask the prospect how those issues are affecting them, and be ready, importantly, be ready to talk about how you've had to deal with similar issues. And then maybe a question about some dimension relative to their target. If you're, dealing or your agency focuses on a specific audience, maybe ask a question about the target so you can showcase your insights about that particular audience and show them that you can bring some different thinking to the table. So remember, what marketers want during the first meeting and call. They want ideas on how you're different. They want questions asked. They want you to demonstrate some sort of strategic understanding before you start bringing the portfolio out. They want to know that you're curious about their business. And these are all open-ended comments that we got back from marketers in our surveys. They want to know that you're a leader, a thought leader in their space. They want to know that you're open to ideas that they might bring to the table, as well as presenting your own ideas. They want to see proven capabilities and case studies, thinking, passion. They want new and unique solutions, and they want honesty. I'll kind of key in on the passion piece of this, because obviously that's a little different. It's not so much about preparation, but it's about how you walk in to a presentation with a prospect. Your passion and energy is critical to demonstrating to that prospect that you have energy and enthusiasm for their business. If you're a low-key kind of individual and you present in a low-key kind of way, I don't care how insightful you are, that low-keyedness has the potential of getting in the way of that prospect being enthusiastic about the potential of working for you or with you. They want to see somebody that's engaged in the business, is enthusiastic about the business. So, if you don't have that sort of personality, maybe bring people into the conversation or the presentation that can kind of bring that enthusiasm to complement some of your efforts. So just something to think about as, if you're in a position where maybe you're not winning as many proposals or you're not moving meetings to the next step, take a look in the mirror and kind of evaluate, am I doing all the things that we're talking about here, or am I just going in and presenting my wares? And then, take a look at yourself and ask yourself if you feel like you're bringing the right level of enthusiasm to the table as you, have conversations with prospects. And remember what marketers say they get during first meetings. They get the agency's opinion, they get creative highlights first, they get their portfolio, they get a sales pitch. Not enough about what the agency can do for them, but more about the agency. Cool examples that aren't necessarily tied to the real world. They get again the sales pitch and marketing speak. So seems like they're two different things in terms of what clients want and what they're getting, more often than not in initial conversations with agencies. So, pre-call meetings, some things you can think about doing just to try and engage that prospect and stay connected with them. Maybe email the prospect beforehand, let them know, after the meeting's been set, how excited you are about meeting with them. Maybe lay out a desired agenda to show them that you're organized and kind of prep them for what you want to discuss. Sample agenda might be, want to start with some agency questions about your company, your market, a general discussion about your business, maybe a review of the agency's initial strategic thinking based on some preliminary study of the business. So you may study some aspects of the business and want to come in and offer some ideas, which is great. Not necessarily comp or spec creative, but some ideas. Maybe review some commonalities between the client's offerings or structure and the agency experience to give them the confidence that you can play with them. And then, overview of agencies, facts, figures, and that, can be at the end as well as work if appropriate. So really want to kind of first focus on the client or the prospect, and then, and let them know that up front that that's your intent, and I think they'll appreciate it. And think about, these folks on the client side. They're very organized. They're used to working with agendas, timelines, things like that. So if you start up front and start laying out things like this, it might help you better connect with them right from the get-go. And if you have a question or two prior to the meeting, don't be afraid to call or email a quick question. Position it as wanting to make the meeting as productive as possible for that prospect. Let them know you really care and want to help. One example, this is related again to another search that we managed for a regional beer brand. We had 3 agencies in the final pitch presentation, and one of the agencies asked literally no questions of me or the client following the presentation of background data to them and the brief that was leading up to this final pitch, and rarely, if ever, responded like with a thank you for sending that information. And that, while they came in with a real solid presentation, at the end of the day, that raised some questions among this marketing prospect, who wondered if, because they were so non-responsive and so not inquisitive about their business leading up to that presentation, they wondered whether that was sort of emblematic of how that agency might operate if they were to move into a relationship with them. At the end of the day, they didn't win for other reasons, but that was part of the discussion and the debrief that we ended up having with the agency. So those kind of things definitely play, and would encourage you to, you don't want to overdo it, but certainly stay engaged with that prospect. Maybe call to confirm the day before, and on the voicemail do a quick reminder of what you're planning on coming to the table with, some ideas, thoughts on the business that might prove of value. So let's talk about managing the call or the meeting. And I remember those cell phones, scary. So rule number 1 is keep the laptop closed. Start by reviewing your proposed discussion agenda. Rule number 2, don't ask them, broadly, just tell me a little bit about your business. You need to start by taking control of the conversation, showcasing your knowledge, your expertise by asking smart questions. And then as you hear those answers, start guiding them towards what we call the bridge back to your experience, and you're subtly selling them on the value that you can bring to the table. Always think about the boxes. You always need to be thinking about what you want them to walk away with as you ask questions and hear those answers, as I just said. Subtly drop into the conversation about how you've done that, how you've had that experience, how you've dealt with those challenges. So, it's a little bit of a game, but sales is a game, and I say this to clients and prospects. I would think that at the end of the day, while presenting your capabilities is more comfortable, I would think that talking about a client's business and getting into some kind of an intellectual discussion about the market and their business would be more fulfilling and interesting to you than just simply going through the rote presentation of your capabilities and ending it with no next step. So it's a great opportunity to learn about the client's business, and if you're smart and fast on your feet, you can think about what they're telling you as they're telling it to you, and think about how you can guide that into opportunities for your agency. You want to build confidence. Ultimately, you want them to check all the boxes and feel good about the decision to see you. You don't want to be cocky. You want to be smart and strategic, in how you showcase the problems you've solved. And when you can, obviously drop in success metrics. had a conversation this morning with one of our new business directors who did just what we're talking about here in an initial conversation with the prospect, talking about I think something related to stem cells. She had done some research when she was in school on stem cells, and this was it was an animal health client, and they got into a great discussion about stem cell research and stuff well beyond my capacity. And as she was talking with that prospect, began to ask questions about kind of it's a digital agency she was representing, began to ask questions about kind of how they supported their business, how they played in the digital space, how they communicated some of those things, and gathered up intel and insights that ultimately are going to be helpful to her client as she hands over that meeting and they move into another discussion with them. So, think about things like that as you walk into these meetings, and ultimately, help that prospect build up confidence in your ability to, understand their business and represent them. Arm them. Not, I don't think critical, but certainly a nice thing to do. Maybe give. All right, looks like we lost audio there. Sorry about that. So hopefully everybody back on. Okay, all right, looks like, yes, everybody's back on. Getting messages from everybody. Good, sorry about that. I should have plugged in my, rule number 5, thank you, Arthur Germain from New York. Rule number 5, check your audio and don't use wireless. There you go. Okay, that's 5A. Thanks, Arthur. Appreciate that. All right, let's go ahead and move on. So, anyhow, all right. So, give them things they can use to share with others. I think we've kind of walked through all of this. So, thank you. Rule number 6: don't leave without an action step. Whether it's follow-up info you're sending or a proposal you're submitting, you need to establish a reason to see them again. So I think that's the one area where many agencies kind of fall down. They fail to put on their sales hat when they're in those conversations, and you need to be thinking about what is the next step. Is it a next meeting where you're going to come to the table and share some ideas and not creative necessarily, but just maybe some strategic ideas that might help that prospect. Maybe it's a proposal that you'd like to submit to them in person if that initial conversation was a phone call, but you need to be thinking about why and how can I see them again. So there's my suggestion. Rule number 7, again, set up a second meeting date. Not always the easiest thing to do, but if you can do it, when you're in that conversation initially, try and go ahead and set up another meeting. So let's talk a little bit about how to most effectively move to close, some of the post-meeting follow-up. Remember, marketers feel that agencies are neither good nor bad at following up after initial meetings. When we asked marketers, how well do you feel agencies follow up, they were kind of in the middle. They don't feel like we're too aggressive. They don't feel like we're not aggressive at all, so it really leaves the door open to push it a bit. And oftentimes, we ask our clients, okay, so you said you were going to follow up with that prospect. What have you done? It's often not enough. Well, I called them once and emailed them once, and 2 weeks have passed and they've done nothing. That's not good enough, because when you leave that meeting, unless you have an action step for a next step, they're moving on to a million other things, and you're going to be last on their list. Remember, few agencies close business after intro calls. We asked how often do you close business immediately after, and very few agencies are doing it. And how long does it typically take to close business? Patience and persistence is key. It can take 2 to 3 months to close something after an initial intro meeting. So you've got to stay with these prospects, even if there isn't anything in hand right now. I just got off a call with a new client whose philosophy about this is I think right. Get him in front of the right prospects. He wants to come to the table with some initial thinking and believes that if he can establish that connection and stay in front of that prospect over time, that he's got obviously a much higher chance of eventually getting on an RFP list or closing a project piece of business with that prospect. Obviously then if he did absolutely nothing at all. But point is, stay with these folks. Part of the game is getting on their radar, getting in the consideration set when they're ready to make a move. Post meeting, it's the toughest part, again, for the following reasons. You're not on top of that prospect's priority list. You're more than likely, and no offense meant, not that great of a salesperson. You want them more than they need you. So some steps to follow post meeting. Some of this is a little basic, but just as a reminder, send a thank you. Not everybody does it. Maybe it's a handwritten note, which would be great, or minimally an email thanking them for the time. Recap briefly and outline next steps. Again, think about these corporate folks. They're dealing in next steps and timelines and things in a very orderly process. And if you can show them that you can operate in similar fashion, that certainly is a good thing. Maybe FedEx a response to if there is some response, follow up with some follow-up materials, put in a call, let them know you sent it. After you sent the FedEx, call them to let you know you sent it, and when it arrives and it's arrived, it's simply just another reason to touch these prospects. Even though obviously you have the signature release information, give them a call, make sure they got it. Gives you another reason to touch that prospect. And then value add. Before the next meeting, drop the prospect an email with a link to an article or a note with a reprint from an article about something you think might be relevant to their world. Ideally, it ties back to something you've talked about with them. Maybe it's a blog post you've written specific to their space, and you thought you'd share it with them to show them that you're there to add some real value to their world, and you're thinking about some of the challenges that they're facing. And then stay on the radar. If you don't get a response right away, don't fret. Pop an occasional call, maybe once a week for the first few weeks. Drop a line with a new article. Again, blog post. Connect with them on LinkedIn or Twitter. You don't want to overwhelm them, but you certainly want to stay with them, and where you can, bring value as you do it. Give it 4 to 6 weeks of staying with them. If you don't get any response, we'll do this sometime. Just say, hey, look, I don't want to keep bothering you, and but is there still interest? And more often than not, you'll get a response if you just kind of say, hey, look, I don't want to bug you. Want to kind of see if there's still an opportunity here or not. And then do it ASAP. I mean, we've had clients who have said, oh, well, the prospect wasn't in that big of a hurry. Well, you know what? You've got mojo coming out of that meeting. Stay on it. Give it to them right away. Don't wait weeks, because they're going to get it and wonder what the heck you're sending them, because so much time has passed. So you've got to move this thing along. You can't wait for them to move it along. You've got to, the need might be slightly there. You need to help make that need even bigger and knocking this thing down the track and moving that prospect to close. And then keep it moving. As I said, always think next step. Always ask if there's anything else you can offer up or do, and then close it. If you can't get them to sign the big deal, maybe they'll start by walking some sort of small project opportunity that certainly is an option, and then seal the deal. So let's talk a little bit about proposals. I've seen too many proposals that aren't thoughtful, are cookie cutter, and don't speak to the prospect in the slightest. And I know for some that is probably just impossible to believe that agencies would put proposals out there that are cookie cutter and talk mostly about themselves and don't really kind of zero in on the client's need state, but they exist. And if you aren't serious about the opportunity and that's all you're going to do, then you might want to ask yourself if it's frankly really something that you want. And if you haven't done the due diligence to determine if it's a viable opportunity, then you haven't done yourself a favor. So if you haven't really probed for the right set of questions, you really, frankly, haven't put the effort into putting a good proposal together, you just may not be doing yourself much of a favor going forward. So some basic principles, but not something we do every day. And this kind of gets back to the Leo Burnett sort of value-added principle of really pushing yourself and not settling for what's just good, but really pushing for what's great. Think about that prospect first. I want to see a first page that talks about the prospect and their challenge and their business, and not a first page that lists pictures of and bios of all the principals and people in your agency. That should be an addendum. So think about that prospect first. Again, the principle of using half the words, and then the principle of being proud of work and success, and then the principle of UX. And I'm going to blow this UX thing out a bit because it's important. It's not just about ease of use, okay, as we think about user experience. It's about some other things, but ease of use as it relates to proposals is make it simple for them to figure out where the heck they are in that proposal, okay? Don't confuse them. Give them big headlines. Tell them where they are and what they're looking at, okay? UX is about an ease of use, it's about an ease of understanding, and it's about relevance. So, easy to work my way through the proposal. It's simple and easy to understand because I've laid it out in few words. I've bulleted stuff, and it's about relevance in that I'm giving you this example, and I'm not just giving you the example, but I'm giving you the example and telling you why I'm giving you the example, okay? It's because you have this problem, okay, and we've dealt with this problem, and now I'm going to show you through this brief case study example of how we've dealt with similar problems. If a marketer is pulling in multiple proposals and say they've got 5 of them, are they gonna spend the time reading every single word on every single proposal? Probably not. So the easier you can make it for them, the easier it is for them to understand what it is you're communicating to them and why you're communicating it to them. Those kind of things are gonna help you win business. Because again, just like the agency that didn't communicate and didn't ask questions during a pitch process, the agency that presents a confusing, very long-winded, very unorganized about me proposal says a whole lot of things differently about how they operate than the agency that does just the opposite. So reviewed a set of proposals recently from a client who was struggling to win some business, and there were things in that proposal, and I reviewed like 3 or 4 of them, that were all the same, despite the fact that these were all very different prospects. And there were things in that proposal, bullets, that weren't tied to the subject heading that this agency was trying to talk about. So they had carried things over from proposal to proposal, and so take a look at your proposals. Have somebody look at them, make sure they make sense, because putting together a good proposal is key, and it doesn't have to take a ton of time to do it. But think about UX in terms of ease of use, ease of understanding, and relevance. Let's talk a little bit about RFIs and RFPs. Some similar principles here. But a couple things up front: don't participate unless you know the following. How many agencies are involved? Is the incumbent involved? who decides, like, who is the decision maker here, and what is the timing. Before I will accept an assignment from a marketer, I will not accept an assignment if the incumbent's involved. I want to know who the decision maker is and make sure that we're getting buy-in on the scope of search from the people that ultimately are going to make the decision. And then obviously timing and so forth. I mean, we try and limit our numbers when we manage searches, and I think frankly, as an agency, you are entitled to know the answers to these questions. And if there are too many agencies involved, unless it's just a client you absolutely would kill for, and you're willing to make that commitment from a time and a financial resource standpoint, you need to find out how many involved, and there are too many, may not be the best thing to get involved. So when not to participate, if you have to pay to pitch, I mean, there's some firms out there where you actually have to pay to participate in a pitch, which is completely crazy. Frankly, if there are more than 7 to 10 in an initial RFI phase, okay, and hopefully in a pitch phase or final pitch presentation phase, you're dealing with 2 or 3. But I've seen situations when they're far more than that. If you can't talk to the client, we encourage our clients to try and get into a conversation with the client even after the RFP's been issued. Because if all you are is a piece of paper or an RFI response on a piece of paper, this is an emotional business, and making that connection with that client is key. So if you can present your RFP or RFI response, if you can have a conversation with the client, maybe make up some questions that the answers to but want to talk to the client about, just something to try and get in front of them is always a good thing. And if you don't have much time, like if they tell you I need the RFI in 3 days, or we're looking to make a decision in a week, I mean, if they haven't thought through this thing well enough, God only knows what they're going to be like when they actually become a client. And similar principles, think prospect first, use half the words, be proud of your work and success, and think UX. And the same UX principles, ease of use, ease of understanding, and relevance. They all play proposal phase as well as RFI and RFP. Let's talk a little bit about pitches. Again, similar, don't participate unless you know how many, incumbent, who decides, and timing. And when not to participate, if you got to pay, there are more than 2 to 3 involved in that final pitch presentation. If you can't talk to the client and you're not given much time. So again, sorry for being repetitive, but hopefully, knock yourself over the head with the fact that you've got to think about the prospect first. You've got to use half the words. You've got to be proud of your work and success. And you've got to think UX, and UX in terms of ease of use, in terms of understanding, and in terms of relevance. So, basic principles, but we see them not followed too many times. So the nirvana state for the client and for you, and we saw this in the last couple of searches that we managed, is that the client makes the selection of an agency because that agency made them feel like they were already ramping up on their business. So let me just jump back to that and speak to that for a second. And what that means is, in the case of these 2 searches, the agencies that won the business did, it wasn't an overwhelming amount of research, but did a fair amount of research on the client, on the market, on the audience, and talked about the client a lot during the course of the final pitch presentation versus a lot about themselves or a lot about in the opportunity in generic terms. And the client partly made the selection because they felt like that agency was already in the ramp-up phase. They already knew enough about their business or their audience or their market so that they could move into development for this client that much quicker. So, think about how you can make your client or your prospect feel like you're already ramping up. And frankly, that's a principle you can carry from the very beginning when you're reaching out to them and showcasing your value and thinking all the way through to the very end. So let's just do a real quick recap here. Remember, it's about them and it's not about you. Remember, you all look alike, and the lines are blurring as more digital firms offer traditional services, more traditional firms get heavier into digital. So think about point of difference and what's in it for me. Remember, this is a multimedia campaign that you have to, build. You've got to activate and you've got to act on. So you've got to hit them with multiple mediums, and you've got to, turn this thing into a little inbound marketing kind of engine for your agency. Remember to think. Half the words, success and work and UX. And remember, UX is about ease of use, ease of understanding, and relevance. And, remember, check the boxes. Remember, and I think finally remember Leo and his principles in terms of not being the order taker, bringing ideas to the table. It's all about adding value to that prospect's world, and again, that starts from the minute you put your program together to reach out to these folks and try and make connections with them, all the way through the process to the very end and beyond, so that you don't end up one of those agencies that's tired and worn out in the mind of the marketer. Constantly push yourself, so hopefully that marketer will never take your name off of their door or their roster, and that relationship will just build and blossom as you move through the years. So want to thank you very much. Feel free to visit our site if you don't know about us. We're at rswus.com. Apologize for the interruption in audio, but really appreciate the time. Sorry this ran a little bit longer than had planned. If you do have any questions, you can reach me at mark@rswus.com. Didn't have any questions that came up today, but if you do have any questions that you want to follow up with, feel free to reach out to me. And you guys have a great day, and take care. All right, bye now.